welcome to the AQUALIS Sustainable Water Compliance Summit. I am Katie Johns, Editor-in-Chief of Stormwater Solutions and Water Quality Products. To begin today, let me explain how you can participate in our event. First of all, if you have any technical difficulties during today's event, please put your questions in the question window and our technical experts will help you out. We recommend disabling any pop-up blocking software or extensions in your browser, as these can cause issues with the webinar player. Additionally, we do welcome questions during all of today's sessions. We will answer as many as we can during the Q&A sessions that will follow each session today, but feel free to send in your questions at any time. To do so, simply type your questions into the Ask a Question window on the side of your screen and hit the Submit button. Also, please be aware that today's event is being recorded and you'll be notified by email when the archive is available. To kick off today's event, I'd like to introduce Aaron Zaske. Aaron is the Chief Development Officer and Certified Stormwater SCM Inspection and Maintenance Professional for AQUALIS, the leading water compliance service provider in the United States and Puerto Rico. As the Corporate Development Leader for AQUALIS, Aaron seeks to increase stormwater and water testing awareness amongst property owners, provide innovative services and solutions to maintain existing water management assets, address aging infrastructure, and disrupt the stormwater and wastewater markets with emerging technology offerings. Aaron has more than 15 years of business and brand development experience in the stormwater, sanitary, construction, and manufacturing industries. She also served on the board of directors for Storm Sensor, a monitoring technology that tracks the effects of climate change and reduces the vulnerability of communities' stormwater and wastewater infrastructure. Aaron, it's all you.
Good morning, and thank you for joining AQUALIS' Sustainable Water Compliance Summit. On behalf of AQUALIS, I would like to welcome you to our event as we appreciate your virtual attendance today. We introduced this event 2 years ago, and it was extremely well received. After a one-year break and several months of thoughtful planning and content development, we are excited to provide this interactive and educational event once again. The knowledge provided will help drive awareness and improve local, regional, and national stormwater, wastewater, and drinking water management practices and regulations, as well as better our waterways. Our intent today is that you take away hours of thoughtful leadership and tools to drive action and improve your water compliance programs. We have a full day of content curated to provide a range of topics that are relevant and engaging. You will also have the opportunity to interact with our speakers and panelists by sending your questions through the platform. We are once again offering continuing education credits with 4 hours available via our 2 tracks discussing PFAS and green stormwater infrastructure. Each of these 4 sessions will be recorded for access later. Certificates of completion will be issued directly to you following participation, and you will receive further details at the beginning of each educational session. Our intent today is to create an educational atmosphere, not only by hearing from our speakers, but by insights from you. We have a wide range of attendees today, from large and small municipalities, lawyers, engineers, Fortune 500 organizations, healthcare leaders, and construction executives. Each of you has so much value to add to our conversations, and we look forward to hearing your contributions. Today, we will begin with our opening keynote address from Andrew Sawyers. Mr. Sawyers is the Director of the Office of Wastewater Management at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C., and oversees the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program. As the Director of OWM, Andrew is also responsible for multiple technical and financial assistance tools for the development and maintenance of the country's wastewater infrastructure. We will end today's summit with our closing keynote address from Darren Olian. Darren is the co-host of the Emmy Award-winning #1 Netflix docuseries with Zac Efron. As the host of the widely popular podcast, The Darren Olian Show, Darren curiously explores people, solutions, and health, as well as life's fatal conveniences, a segment of the show uncovering modern-day flaws and challenges that may be undermining our health and environment. Darren and I will be discussing a broad range of topics related to his experiences around the world preserving water resources. We are extremely excited to bring these 2 speakers who have varied and immense experiences that we hope you will find impactful and provide new perspectives on sustainable water management practices in the U.S. As I mentioned previously, both of our keynote addresses will conclude with offering you access to these speakers with open conversation and discussion. With the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, funding has become a topic of conversation in every sector of the water industry, and stormwater is no exception. Historically, the stormwater sector has been underfunded. In today's panel discussion, you will hear from various professionals, both from the private and public sectors, on how they've received funding for their projects and clients, challenges they've overcame, and more. They'll share their perspectives and advice that will help you navigate the path to securing funding for your projects. As temperatures continue to fluctuate at unprecedented rates and storms become stronger and more frequent, it can be expected that our infrastructure will continue to decline without proper investment. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the U.S. averages 10,000 thunderstorms, 5,000 floods, 1,300 tornadoes, and numerous widespread hurricanes every year. Weather alone is responsible for 90% of all presidentially declared disasters. For the first time in years, 2023 is expected to be an El Niño year, at least through the spring, meaning weaker trade winds due to warmer surface water in the Pacific. These mild years with fewer amounts of significant weather events are becoming less frequent. This year, the EPA has announced the availability of $2.4 billion in grant funding to support stormwater and wastewater infrastructure upgrades that will protect public health. Another $16 million in grant opportunities was announced weeks later. The funding is focused on environmental justice in communities and environmental justice through safer and more sustainable products. These investments encourage pollution prevention, especially in underserved and rural communities. At our last summit, we spoke of aging water infrastructure across the United States. As I mentioned earlier, today we will expand on this and hear from various professionals how rehabilitating the aging systems is possible through grants and funding. We'll also hear from experts in green infrastructure regarding the emerging stormwater controls compared to those of the traditional gray systems. Most of us are familiar with green stormwater infrastructure, or GSI, and many of you have either installed it at your facilities or in your communities, or have been tasked to maintain it. While many are eager to promote GSI, we often see these systems quickly neglected when it comes to proper preventative maintenance, leading to our initial investments losing their appeal. Today, at one of our seminars, we will discuss establishing green infrastructure as a sustainable and reliable alternative to gray infrastructure, led by Jennifer Court of GHD, a global civil engineering firm. Afterward, Scott Radford of Stantec will share his insights on maintaining these GSI assets in a cost-effective manner. Our second track during today's summit surrounds PFAS. Last month, the EPA proposed new regulations for PFAS and PFOA in the nation's drinking water. Drinking water concerns are prevalent across the country, and although this is not a new topic, we are thrilled to see action being taken. PFAS, or forever chemicals, are found in water, air, and our food. Today, we will focus on the new laws and regulations that have surfaced and learn more about the regulations to come. In one of our discussions, our speakers will share their legal literacy to walk through some of the EPA's current and proposed regulations. With public health at the forefront, we will learn of liability for property owners, managers, consultants, and dischargers. In a subsequent session, Alan LeBlanc will address how to stay compliant with these regulations through sampling and testing our drinking water. With all of that being said, today you will hear industry experts discuss many topics and what we as leaders within the water industry need to do to drive change and create a better, more sustainable environment for us and future generations. AQUALIS was founded with one mission: to inspire change by preserving and protecting our most precious natural resource, water. I hope that you leave our summit excited and ready to act in the future of water sustainability. AQUALIS is once again excited to welcome you to our full day of thought-provoking questions and topics.
Thank you, Erin. I'm so excited to kick off the event with our first session, Delivering Solutions for Clean Water, with our keynote speaker, Andrew D. Sawyers. Andrew is the Director of the Office of Wastewater Management at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. Andrew oversees the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, the Clean Water Act's mechanism for the permitting of municipal and industrial discharge industrial discharge into surface waters of the U.S. as the Director of OWM. As the Director of OWM, Andrew is also responsible for multiple technical and financial assistance tools for the development and maintenance of the country's wastewater infrastructure, including WIFIA, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund SRF, and EPA's Water Finance Center. He previously worked for the Maryland Water Quality Financing Administration, where he managed the state's clean water and drinking water SRFs and Maryland's Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund. Andrew has a PhD from Johns Hopkins University in geography and environmental engineering. So with that, the floor is all yours, Andrew.
So thank you so much. I'm really bummed that I'm not able to see you all, or you see me. Unfortunately, we couldn't figure out how to get by the EPA's firewall. But I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. It's a real pleasure to speak to you all. Just listening to the introduction and AQUALIS and exactly how you were set up, and the mission very much aligns with so much of what's happening at the agency. And so I want to really thank you all again for just steadfastly, not just your work, but trying to get this conversation to happen. And so I want to make sure I touch on some key things that the agency, specifically in my shop, some of the things that we've been working on, and how many of those align with you, with your agency's mission. So, again, I'm Andrew Sawyers. I'm the Director of EPA's Office of Wastewater Management, and within my office, there are three major areas, and all three areas, frankly, in some ways, impact sustainable water. And so I think a lot of what you're about, my office actually focus on that. So let me just give you sort of an overview of what happens in my office, in the Office of Wastewater Management, in EPA, in the Office of Water. We have these three large divisions, each focusing on unique wastewater and stormwater issues. We have the Water Permits Division, which it's a very busy organization, if you will, advancing wastewater infrastructure into on-the-ground solution to improve water quality throughout the country through the NPDES program, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. Our next division is the Water Infrastructure Division, which manages and oversees the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, many grant programs, cooperative agreements for technical assistance efforts, including our finance centers, which are housed in each EPA region. We do a lot of work on sustainable utility management. We have efforts related to workforce, infrastructure programs that support tribal communities, communities along the Mexico border, communities in Alaska. So we have a fairly huge Alaska Native Village infrastructure program. And then the third and final division that I oversee is the WIFIA Management Division. And approximately 4.5, almost 5 years ago, we stood up this federal bank, WIFIA, which is the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act program. It's a bank that provides flexible, low-interest loans for water infrastructure projects. So I'd like to start the conversation today talking a bit about some of the successes of our programs from the last 50 years. I want to discuss the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law a bit. I'll spend a bit of time on integrated planning. I'll discuss some of our funding programs. And lastly, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the future of water infrastructure, at least some of my perspective on the future of water infrastructure. So as I think back to the last 50 years, I remember last fall I was with the EPA Administrator, Michael Reagan, and the Assistant Administrator for Water, Radhika Fox. And we're on the banks of the Cuyahoga River, and we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Act. And because of the multidisciplinary approach and sort of the unique cooperative federalism framework of the Clean Water Act, I think we've seen tremendous successes, and frankly, we're witnesses to improvements that are significant. Source water is better protected, and communities, many communities across the United States are returning to waters where they can frankly fish and swim. And the Clean Water Act, it provided construction grants. It injected over $60 billion into the nation's water infrastructure to build wastewater treatment projects. In 1987, we moved from the construction grant era to the state revolving fund model, which is frankly the bread and butter of wastewater infrastructure funding at this time and financing in the country. And so the Clean Water Act, just thinking about the Clean Water Act a bit, it set up this framework of national technology-based standards for pollutant industries while providing a system for states to establish water quality-based standards for surface waters. Both the national tech standards and the state-specific water quality-based standards are then implemented through the NPDES program, which I mentioned earlier. And both, obviously, this is administered by EPA and the authorized states. And so these traditional tools are responsible in many ways for ratcheting down on, on pollution and that are typically discharged in waters, as well as we provide some of the funding for the infrastructure efforts. I think about the Clean Water SRF, which is one of the programs that I talked about that we manage. We have invested over $160 billion in protecting and improving the nation's water quality through almost 43,000 assistance agreements with communities across the country. And so while our rivers are no longer on fire, as mentioned when I talked about standing on the banks of the Cuyahoga River, there is still significant progress to be made to fulfill the mandates of the Clean Water Act. We should applaud the successes of the Clean Water Act because when you think about some of the tools that are available to us, how we can leverage those tools to ensure that communities have reliable, resilient wastewater infrastructure and clean water in which we can recreate and drink. The Clean Water Act essentially has been sort of the bedrock in many ways in creating and influencing and leveraging those tools. So I'm going to move to the next slide, which is I want to focus a bit on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is frankly a historic investment in water. I think many of you are aware that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provided almost $50 billion to the Environmental Protection Agency, $12 billion for clean water infrastructure, wastewater, stormwater, non-point sources, decentralized system, and emerging contaminants, all which I think are important to you. The funding will go through the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund, but most of my conversation with you today will focus on the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. States are responsible for soliciting and selecting projects, determining the additional subsidy and some of the other priorities. They're also responsible for designing and managing the application process and ultimately submitting their intended use plans to EPA. And then EPA works with states as partners to review and approve the intended use plans, award grants to the states who subsequently deploy those grants either in the form of additional subsidy or loans to communities across the country. EPA also takes a closer look at the Clean Water SRF, the affordability criteria, to make sure that we're capturing urban and rural disadvantaged communities to ensure those communities have a better chance of receiving additional subsidy. We help states and we look at the ranking systems and the intended use plan commensurate with the need to ensure disadvantaged communities are receiving investments. We evaluate emerging contaminants and eligibility criteria, including PFAS, which we talked about in the introduction, to ensure many of the communities across the country and others are receiving investments to address these critical pollutants. And so I believe the bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, presents, in my mind, and I think many within EPA, a tremendous opportunity, a great investment opportunity by the government and our partners to address wastewater infrastructure that will support communities across the country, especially some of our low-income communities. And you've probably heard me talk about disadvantaged communities and low-income communities because many have struggled historically to receive and access federal funding. And so I think this partnership framework, this collaboration, this coordination with EPA, states, and communities and other key stakeholders will help many lower-income communities if we do it properly, and it will help many of these lower-income communities, frankly, to change the odds in these communities, to ensure that they have a real opportunity to build sustainable and resilient systems going forward. And so for us to achieve the success that I just talked about and coupling the bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law investments, there's some tools that we have been working on and building within the Office of Water, specifically within my office, that I'd like to share with you and discuss a bit. The first is disadvantaged communities. And so disadvantaged communities, we have spent a lot of time thinking about how to really lean into supporting disadvantaged communities across the country. When we took a look at the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, one of the things that I think many of us think about outside of EPA and frankly many within the agency, that the significant amount of resources that the United States Congress provided to us really is a unique down payment, if you will, a much needed down payment toward water and wastewater infrastructure, helping to modernize systems to handle much of the 21st century needs. It is frankly a tremendous investment by the government that will support millions of Americans for years to come. But that is only one part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. The bill also provides us with unique tools to ensure the benefits that these investments can reach the most in need, namely our underserved communities. The agency made a deliberate decision to ensure that 49% of the funding would go to disadvantaged community as additional subsidy. It is a departure of what we did previously. AdSub could go to everyone. But we made a concerted decision that we wanted to ensure that communities historically that have not received funding through the agency's critical programs would benefit from some of the resources here. And the additional subsidy can go out in the form of grants, principal forgiveness, negative interest rate, loans. We can buy or refinance and restructure debt. And so what this means for many communities is that we are frankly and potentially removing a significant barrier for communities that are struggling. Another key effort that we've been looking at in terms of supporting disadvantaged communities is that the agency, EPA, and states are using 2% of their funding for administration purposes. And this is a critical thing, not just for EPA, but for many of the states. We're utilizing those resources to help communities access SRFs through what I'm calling an unprecedented level of technical assistance. So many communities with failing or inadequate water infrastructure, they typically struggle with what I call low capacity. By that, by low capacity, I have a broader definition, if you will. By that, I mean resources, skills, workers, technology, grant writing, project management. Those are deficits, if you will. Those are gaps that exist in many communities, lower-income communities, some of our rural communities. And so I believe at the heart of many of the infrastructure gaps that we see in communities, lower-income communities and rural communities across the country, is this issue of limited capacity. And so our technical assistance resources, our technical assistance efforts, the tools that we're employing to deliver technical assistance across the country, in many ways, it's geared at addressing this capacity issue. The technical assistance work that we plan to do, we believe that it can help communities to prioritize their needs, identify projects, help with planning, help with applications for financing, and overall, help communities improve their technical, managerial, and financial assistance. Just last November, we announced the selection of 29 new environmental finance centers that will help communities across the country access federal funding for water infrastructure projects that improve public health and environmental protection. The Environmental Finance Centers will deliver targeted technical assistance to local government, states, tribes, non-governmental organizations to protect public health, safeguard the environment, and advance environmental justice. We will award up to $150 million over the next 5 years, with much of these resources targeting communities, underserved communities, utilizing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law resources through the admin element that I just discussed. Our technical assistance efforts will focus on addressing the various aspects of the capacity issue, the capacity failure, the capacity gap. We will look at different ways to provide technical assistance that seeks to address the multiple compounding challenges that so many of our communities face when they're attempting to improve water infrastructure. I believe this is a unique opportunity for EPA. It's a unique opportunity for our states and tribes and territories and all of our partners to strengthen coordination relationship to ensure that communities across the United States that have not accessed funding historically will be able to do so. And so we're going to be looking at communities differently. It's a wide spectrum, if you will. Some might just need planning assessment. Some might be way further, just need support for funding, assistance, putting their applications together. Others might need both. But we will meet the community where they need us. EPA will be walking hand in hand with many of these communities. We're not going in and say, this is what you need to do. We're going in and asking, what is it you want to do? Here's the assessment that we have jointly worked on, that we have jointly developed. How best can we help to ensure that you have resilient infrastructure going forward? And so our goal for our technical assistance effort is to promote, it is to provide assessment, generate solutions that are, again, resilient, right-sized for that community, and assist in funding and financing applications. And so many communities that need technical assistance to address compliance issues will be able to access these resources. We want to help communities in whatever capacity to be in the best possible position to receive infrastructure funding and financing going forward. So that is one of the tools, the technical assistance framework, the bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, that I believe will help us to continue to realize the goals, not just the spirit, but the goals of the Clean Water Act. Another area that I want to spend a few minutes on is green infrastructure. This has been an important part of our programming within the Office of Water. Green infrastructure, as many of you know, help to protect public health and water quality, and it remains a critical part of a national effort to protect against climate change. Green infrastructure serves communities everywhere and can strengthen the overall infrastructure capacity by capturing and treating rain where it falls rather than overwhelming our sewers. Green infrastructure increases, in many places, the resiliency of our infrastructure. It reduces flooding into homes and businesses and help us deal with some of the challenges related to climate change. Green infrastructure also, when you think about some of the BMPs, the best management practices associated with green infrastructure, whether it's trees, green spaces, people-friendly streets, many of our underserved communities don't have that, but those are some of the benefits that typically accrue. Those are some of the best management practices that can be deployed so communities can accrue those benefits. Green infrastructure also has the potential to mitigate or meaningfully reduce just a lot of issues facing communities, whether it's flooding, pollution, lack of green space, extreme heat. Many of you are fully aware of what I'm discussing here. Recently, I was reading an article and it went back to the aftermath of Hurricane Ian. It was a really interesting article because I think in many ways it spotlighted a lot of the work that we have been doing. But this specific article spotlighted the community Babcock Ranch in Florida. It's about 12 miles north of Fort Myers. And Babcock Ranch really took advantage of green infrastructure, some of the technological innovations, and frankly, exceptional community planning. They have a nearby solar sort of array for power, and lines are buried underground to avoid wind damage. The streets were designed to flood, so the houses did not, and the natural landscaping and green infrastructure helped lessen the impact of the storm's strength, and so, the impact felt by many others. At this stage, billions available through bill will help many communities to hopefully deploy what we saw in Babcock Ranch. 10 miles south, there were significant damages, and in the community of Babcock Ranch, many of those homes and frankly the infrastructure was barely unscathed. And so it is possible when we think about how we build resilient communities. It obviously takes commitment, but resources are absolutely an essential part of it. And this is part of what our technical assistance effort specifically to green infrastructure is aiming at, addressing the capacity, providing the resources, and we also, I think, collectively have the commitment to ensure that these systems are deployed in such a way, or these benefits are deployed in such a way that our communities are more resilient going forward. Another tool for us is integrated planning. Many of you might not be aware of integrated planning, but this is a really important tool for us. It is a framework that encourages municipalities to use the flexibilities of the Clean Water Act to look holistically at wastewater and stormwater investments in order to prioritize the most effective actions to address water quality. Through integrated planning, communities have realized the multiple benefits of green infrastructure to improve water quality, improve green and desirable places to live, and increase climate resiliency. We recently released a report to Congress on integrated planning. It showcased 13 municipalities across the country that had water quality challenges and how integrated planning helped with building the priorities, supporting the infrastructure investments, and identified ways to duplicate some of those resources, some of those results going forward. And so when I think about some of the examples, Akron, Ohio, they pursued, in the report to Congress, you will see Akron, Ohio, pursuing integrated planning to address projects that required a consent decree, that were required by the consent decree, which total almost $1.1 billion. And through this revised project sequencing, implementation of green infrastructure and partial sewer separation, the city saved, almost $160 million in projects and treated an additional almost 826 million gallons of wastewater beyond what the consent decree required. We have several integrated planning resources on our website, and I encourage this audience to check them out. Perhaps the bottom line is that communities should know that many different climate stress-oriented projects, including traditional stormwater projects, are actually eligible for funding under EPA's Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. This includes traditional pipe, storage, treatment, sediment controls, green infrastructure such as green roofs, rain barrels, rainwater harvesting, and management, frankly, bioretention, permeable pavements, and more. Development and implementation of the stormwater management plans, MS4, BMPs, those are also eligible. And so I encourage you all, to the extent you're thinking about financing some of your stormwater or green infrastructure investments, take a look at the Clean Water SRF. Much of this is also eligible as additional subsidy as a part of the Green Project Reserve, which much of those resources actually go out as grants, and it's still eligible outside of the additional subsidy, but much of it go out as grants in states. So you should know, by developing an integrated plan, that's also eligible for funding under the Clean Water SRF. And so we're putting a lot of effort, my office, we're putting a lot of effort into other aspects of wastewater infrastructure, including sustainable utility management and ways for communities and utilities to help prioritize their needs. For example, we recently revised what I'm calling the augmented alternatives analysis. I think this is a really useful infrastructure planning tool. And we highlighted a couple of case studies where this tool was used. This AAA document augments traditional infrastructure investment analysis and planning, helping communities to proactively engage, to understand their priorities and elevate their awareness of utility needs. The AAA, or the Augmented Alternatives Analysis, also address and quantify some of the environmental benefits, some of the economic and social benefits, and some of the costs associated with these long-term infrastructure investments. Selecting the most cost-effective project alternative when there are multiple drivers or sources of water pollution, which often is, it makes many of these project decisions incredibly complex. And this AAA analysis, hopefully, we believe, and we have seen in several cases where it helps the community to land on a right-sized solution, if you will, that can help the community to implement what's best for them, meeting them exactly where they need to be met at their, at the community level. Another area that we're spending a lot of time on, and I know we have a bit of time here, but I want to cover a fair amount of ground with you all, just discussing some of the really important efforts within the office. I want to focus a bit on emerging technologies. As communities plan for and access the clean water SRF and build investments in the near future, they can also take advantage of new and emerging technologies. We're fortunate to live in an age where information can spread really quickly and lessons learned can be shared. One of the new tools in my office is called the Searchable Clearinghouse for Wastewater Technologies, SCOUT for short. And SCOUT is an information sharing platform that provides resources on cost effectiveness and performance of innovative, alternative, and reused wastewater technologies. SCOUT includes information for centralized and decentralized treatment systems, as well as water reuse technologies. They're separated by 3 searchable databases featuring resources such as reports, case studies, and webinars. And in addition, there's a map function that allows users to search resources based on geographic location. And so as communities invest in water and wastewater infrastructure, SCOUT can help to fill this critical information gap on, where people have adopted innovative alternatives, where we see innovative reuse technologies, helping to inform their local wastewater decisions and solutions. And especially, this will be ideal for small, mid-sized, and decentralized communities. SCOUT will include information on adopted technologies and solutions that have demonstrated effectiveness based on some of the performance analysis for a particular application. Another growing example of an area where we see a lot of efforts, and my office is fully supporting, is around smart data infrastructure and smart technologies. I recently authored a short op-ed on this topic. These technologies can enhance the collection, storage, and analysis of water-related data. They can leverage hardware communication and management to inform operational decisions that ultimately improve the efficiency, reliability, and lifespan of many of the physical assets. I also want to touch on a program that I'm incredibly proud of in our office. Today, we have advanced and created some of when I think about some of the financial deployments and some of the creative solutions that we have implemented over the last 50 years, frankly, the SRF over the last 37 years, nothing short of amazing. About 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, we started to think about this new program, the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. Congress authorized the program. And I think in many ways, this program just demonstrates what will and commitment is about, frankly, or about. We have advanced and we've created all these interesting financial mechanisms, making them available to communities. And this program that I mentioned earlier has been incredibly successful over the last 5 years, 4.5 years. WIFIA, which is a federal bank, provides loans that are flexible financing tools. WIFIA loans provide the borrowers a lot of flexibility, customized terms to meet their needs. We match the loan tenor to what the community needs are. And eligibility for this program is broad, which means that almost any type of water infrastructure project, including wastewater and stormwater, drinking water, green infrastructure, also the borrower can be government, private, public-private partnerships can actually benefit from WIFIA financing. There's a lot of eligibility is pretty diverse, and projects can be combined together under one or loan or a master agreement. And borrowers have up to 35 years following construction completion to repay the loan, and repayment can be sculpted over time. the rates are favorable, typically, matched at the Treasury rate. Interest rates are locked at closing, and interest does not accrue until the loan is drawn. And so far, in 4.5 years, we have closed over 100 loans, and we have loaned out over $17 billion, supporting over $37 billion in infrastructure project investments. And so I want to end by talking a little bit about the federal perspective on the future. I spend a lot of time just talking about some of the programs, some of the tools that we have available to us. I started with technical assistance. I talked a lot about some of the financial programs, the green infrastructure, the integrated planning. I talked about WIFIA, some of the financial innovations. I talked about emerging contaminants. And so we have all these tools available to us. And as I noted during the talk, is that for many communities across the country, EPA will be a partner. You all will be a partner with us. And I believe collectively, if we do this properly, if we do this correctly, I think we absolutely can change the odds in some of these communities. I started by talking a little bit about the 50 years prior and just the immense success that we have seen because of the Clean Water Act and how that act was structured and some of the changes that occurred over time. So as I think about what's next, I am just incredibly optimistic about what the future looks like, frankly. Glancing back in the past and examining the tools that we have used, and it's really fantastic in terms of the tools that we have deployed. And as I think going forward, as we need to continue progress over the next 50, I just want to peek a little bit into the future. I want to focus on maybe 4 critical areas that require attention to achieve and sustain progress, perhaps more to sustain progress. First, there needs to be investments in equity and affordability, not just financial, but policy, engagement, other types of investment. We must work to provide safe and affordable access for all. Ensure that all communities can benefit from the historic investments by providing robust technical assistance. I think much of our resources and technical assistance efforts at EPA will be critical. This first area, investments in equity and affordability, will address one of the key things that I talked about, capacity. We have to build capacity to actually build resilient communities. Second, I think investments in resilient and sustainable infrastructure is going to be key. During the introduction, our speaker talked about rainfall, talked a little bit about just, some of the impacts we're seeing in our communities, flooding, natural events, climatic events being such a significant part of some of the disruptions we've seen in our communities. And so as we peek into the future, and frankly, not even peeking, as we look into the future, we have to do everything we can to ensure that we have a resilient infrastructure going forward, one that actually serves everyone, that will keep our waters clean for decades into the future, one that can respond to the dynamic challenges that we're seeing with the climatic disruptions, one that can help our more under-resourced communities that are typically way more impacted. And frankly, if we can help many of these under-resourced communities through building more resilient and sustainable infrastructure, I think that's going to help the larger economy. And maybe just a minute on that. When we think about some of the climate events that we have seen and the impact on many of our underserved communities, there are so many analyses that we can draw from. But generally, many of these communities, it takes them forever to recover. Some, frankly, never recover. But it's not just a recovery issue. When you think about the impact on so many of these communities, there's interest rate because many of them have lower median household income. It is more costly for them to actually borrow. Their insurance premiums go up. And so many of these communities, they're just all these extenuating circumstances, compounding issues, prevent many of these communities from ever recovering. And so this second area, investing in resilient and sustainable infrastructure, is critical going forward. Third, we really need to sort of package it together, build integrated project management systems that is geared to holistically address water infrastructure. We need to maximize the efforts around our SRFs, invest in technical assistance programs, invest in programs, utilize programs such as WIFIA, and integrate and invest in new and smart technologies. We need all of them in some combination to ensure that we have resilient water and wastewater services and capable stormwater management systems that meet the change in precipitation patterns. So I'll close with this fourth area, and it's one that I'm reminded of daily when I walk through the halls at EPA and I see the talented team that I work with that have accomplished so much, and they have been so resilient. And so this fourth area, what I'm speaking about, is the water workforce, if you will, for the next generation, for the next several decades. I think it's often underestimated how important a skilled workforce is to the success of our investments, our infrastructure, and frankly, the health of our communities. The dollars provided and spent on manufactured equipment, on pipes and distribution systems, they'll fail if we don't have the workforce to operate and maintain them. Communities fall apart when our educated and ambitious youth move away. So I think attracting and retaining a skilled workforce and technically competent workforce is critical to ensuring our nation's precious water infrastructure continues to provide clean and safe water for communities across the United States. The water sector, I believe, provides well-paid, meaningful careers and a chance to make a real difference in communities every day. It's not just a job. Frankly, it's not just a job for me. It is a commitment. It's just part of the service that I signed up for. I think like many sectors, the water sector faces the prospect of many potential retirements over the next several years. And it's therefore incredibly important to make sure we can attract new workers and give them the skills they need. The work environment going forward will also be increasingly complex. I talk about some of the innovation around technology. It will require digital skills and the ability to use these technologies to help operate our systems more efficiently and, frankly, more effectively. And so it's essential that we involve our water workers in all aspects of the process of adopting new technologies and the skills and sort of provide them with the skills necessary to use them. From assessing the organizational needs to setting priorities for those new technologies, all the way to providing ongoing training and support to ensure that these workers can embrace and use the technologies for the long haul. Even with the advent of new technologies, people are and will continue to be the heart and soul of an effective and sustainable utility. Without people, our dedicated water custodians and technicians, our water infrastructure will crumble. I think getting communities, getting more people involved in and committed to the water sector is absolutely essential to our health and well-being in the future. And so I close and I thank you all for spending some time with me talking about the last 50 years and some of the key efforts that we're deploying within the agency, and frankly, peeking into the future a bit and talking about some of the real needs going forward. The bottom line is the Office of Wastewater Management is working earnestly, and we're looking to continue to partner with you all to obviously implement the bill, but also beyond the bill to help build resilient and sustainable communities with a real focus on underserved Americans, with a real focus on changing the odds for so many communities across this great country. So with that, I'll be happy to take questions. It's been a pleasure sharing some of my thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was great and very informative. And yes, we do have time for questions. So any of our viewers, if you would like to submit questions, you can do so in the question box, and we will get to as many as we can. So, Andrew, the first question we have, in talking to some industry professionals, they have this perspective that historically, when money was allocated for stormwater or was for wastewater, it ended up going to drinking water or another water sector that, wasn't stormwater. So, what does the EPA have plans in place to ensure that the money that's allocated for stormwater or wastewater is going to those sectors?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. That's an interesting question. So the way the programs are set up at EPA specifically, you have the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. You also have the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund. The Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund is actually the bigger program. It's, as I mentioned, it's about $160 billion. The drinking water is somewhat smaller. Mm-hmm. And when Congress appropriates the funding for clean water, it has to be used for clean water purposes. The SRFs, the state revolving loan funds, they do have the ability to transfer, but the transfer element has not impacted, the amount of resources that are going to clean water. And I also mentioned, as part of the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, we have this tool called the Green Project Reserve that funds a lot of stormwater-related projects. So a long answer, essentially, our resources, the resources on the clean water side, generally will not end up funding drinking water projects. They are, more often than not, they're utilized for clean water projects. So that's not an area that I think we are concerned about, because those resources are generally used for the purposes that Congress appropriated them for.
Okay, great. Our next one, as a vendor of new technologies for wastewater collection systems, how can we promote our services in SCOUT, which, in case anyone doesn't know, SCOUT is the Searchable Clearinghouse of Wastewater Technology?
So what I would suggest, if you could, so myself and Frank Sylvester are on, please just send us a note, an email with your information. We'll make sure our team get back to you. I think the way they essentially will, integrate your information into SCOUT. So just send us the information, and I'll forward that to my team to integrate into the SCOUT database.
Great. And this question is going back to when you were talking about 49% of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funds going out as additional subsidies. How was that 49% selected? How was that number decided on?
So Congress actually made the decision that 49% of the funds must go out as additional subsidy. EPA may, through, congressional, listening to Congress's intent, focus those resources on underserved communities. But within the SRFs, within the Clean Water SRF, we still have a pot of resources in terms of, additional subsidy that can go to any communities, including green infrastructure communities. But specific, the answer, the short answer to your question, 49% was determined by the United States Congress.
Okay, gotcha. And I know on your last slide you talked about recruiting the next generation of the workforce, and some entities and programs have talked about going into high schools and even middle schools to kind of explain to young students what the water industry is all about. We're wondering if you can expand on if the EPA has any programs or initiatives that would help recruit that next generation in the workforce.
No, that's a great question. We do actually. So EPA, and we are planning our second iteration, but EPA last year implemented our first workforce grant program. It was a small amount of resources. I think it was about $4 million that we used that to select almost 9 different entities across the country, from California to Florida. And the idea there was that they would build workforce programs that can help to recruit from exactly what you're just talking about, community centers, from high schools. And so we're now in the process of designing and even expanded with additional resources. And we will, as soon as we have the RFA out, to the extent you all want to be a part of the circulation, please, send us that information. I'll ensure that we'll make sure that the team that's actually put in the RFA together will, get it out to this group, and interested parties are welcome to submit an application. But yes, we do have this new workforce grant program that's really trying to make a difference on the ground in terms of recruiting or building or trying to get, attract new workers into the water sector.
Absolutely. And we talk with a lot of professionals who, feel that there is, kind of a gap in the workforce, and there's, more workforce needed. So why do you think that is in the water sector? And just, can you share your perspective on that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, actually. I think about it a lot. I grew up, so I think about even my own experience. I grew up, around water and spent a lot of time as a child, and so it was something that I was always committed to. And I think about water now, even talking to my own kids about the water careers, and there's obviously an interest because of I am in there, and I think part of it sometimes people don't understand that one, maybe they don't think the salary's there. Two, it is not one of the things that we talk about historically, like, oh, the water sector is a great place. But I can tell you, I mean, being a part of the water sector, it is an incredibly enriching, sometimes I don't think of this as a job. It's a hobby. It is something that you absolutely love to do. There's a commitment to it. And part of our job, I think all of us, frankly, is to tell that story about the water sector. At the heart of it is we're protecting Americans. From the drinking water side, we're ensuring that communities across this country, and when you look at across the world, the safest water quality, drinking water quality provided in this country. But we're also cleaning up rivers and streams so people can fish and recreate and swim. And so the role of the water sector, and thinking about it and thinking about the benefits that accrue to all Americans, I cannot imagine a more important sector to work in. And so that's part of my job, part of the reason why I have these conversations, because I really do think we have an obligation to ensure that more people are interested. We diversify to the extent we can. But thank you for asking that question. I often, wonder why myself, and in part, maybe it's not the career of choice for a lot, but that's part of my job, to try and figure out a way to make sure it's a career of choice for many.
Absolutely. All right. Is there any funding for grassroots educational and engagement programs within disadvantaged communities?
Yes. So obviously in my office, we have a significant amount of technical assistance effort where we're working with environmental finance centers across the country, across each EPA region, and part of their job is we have this new intake form on our website where, and if you need that information, we'll be able to send it to you, where communities that need support with water and wastewater issues can actually submit a request to us, and we will deploy one of those technical assistance providers to work with the community to assess the problem, think about some of the solutions going forward, and ultimately help them to apply, hopefully get funding, and then as part of that continuum, help with construction monitoring and post-construction. So EPA is investing, at least the Office of Water is investing significant amount of resources in communities to help communities access these funding. So that's the Office of Water, but EPA's Office of Environmental Justice is even a similar effort. I think it's almost $170 million that they're investing in centers. I think it's 17 they're called Thriving Communities Centers, to help communities, again, address some of their water and wastewater issues. And then in the Office of Air, we have our new greenhouse gas fund program that the framework was just recently released. A lot of that will be geared to helping communities to address some of the energy efficiency elements. And so, part of what we at the agency is working to do is to ensure that our, tool, if you will, our resources are in one place where communities across the country can start to better access and figure out which resources is best for the needs or best for my needs. But yes, there are a significant amount of programs within the agency geared towards helping communities address their water and wastewater needs.
Great. All right, moving right along. We're getting some really good questions. All right. A question that is often discussed is the lack of consistency regarding regulation enforcement at the local, municipal, and county level. Some are very consistent, whereas others show little to no attention in enforcing regulations to protect water resources, or in some cases, just don't have the budget to cover the staff needed for that enforcement. What can the EPA do, or is the EPA doing from a federal level to help some of these local counties in making sure there's a more standard regulation enforcement in overall compliance?
That's a wonderful question. I like that question. I must be honest, I have not been thinking a lot about that question. Last several months, we've been spending so much time thinking about how to help, our lower income communities across the country. But specifically, so I also oversee the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, or NPDES program. And so in terms of the consistency, that was just the question actually asked about how can we promote consistency. We spend a lot of time working to deliver webinars and workshops and meeting with communities to talk about, the various regulations or the various rules or permits in my space that we oversee. And so that is one of the things that we do. But we also, there's on our website, we continue to try and deliver products that speaks to consistency, that speaks to what the federal government requires. In some cases, and I want to make sure that we provide a bit of clarity here. In a lot of cases, the federal requirements, if you will, that's like the benchmark, and states and local municipalities often can go beyond that. So there's, and also the other point that I think is really critical here, we do think consistency is important, but also I think flexibility is really key. I think many communities across the country want that flexibility. So, when you think about some of the environmental issues that are, plaguing our communities, you actually do need customized approaches to address some of those issues. So the one-size-fits-all doesn't work for everyone. So yes, consistency is important, but listening to communities, we also need to provide opportunities for them to customize the way they respond to some of the environmental issues that they're dealing with.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, next question. So this person recently read an article that said local water treatment costs are anticipated to increase due to the additional treatment required to remove forever chemicals, PFAS, from water supplies. Is the EPA and are any other branches of government going to do anything to help offset increased costs for water treatment for communities around the country?
Yes, absolutely. As part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, on both sides of the aisle, I manage the clean water side, and my partner, if you will, Jennifer McLean, manages the drinking water side. We have $1 billion on the clean water side to help with emerging contaminants, including PFAS, and so much of that will go through the State Revolving Loan Fund. Similarly, on Jennifer's side, she has about $5 billion to help address emerging contaminants, including PFAS, on the drinking water side. So, yes, significant amount of resources within the agency. Many states are actually building new programs to provide ways, financial programs to provide ways to mitigate and help communities address the costs associated with PFAS and other emerging contaminants.
All right, great. This is going back to the topic of workforce. So what does the EPA recruiting process look like, and how can students looking to get into the industry get started or involved?
That's thank you. Whoever asked that question, thank you so much. Because it's a critical question for us. I mean, I talked a little bit about when you look at the profile of the folks within the EPA staff, if you will, there's a significant amount of staff members my colleagues who can retire in the next few years, frankly, can retire now. And so building the next generation of EPA staff is absolutely essential. And one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time doing is just, many of us are going out at various conferences and workshops talking about working at EPA. And obviously, I am on the programmatic side, but our OMS and our teams that are responsible for recruiting are trying to create all these new different ways, whether it's direct hire. We have an ORISE program where recent graduates can come in to do research, and many of our ORISE ultimately become permanent staff at EPA. But again, if there's an interest in jobs, I spend a lot of time talking to students, encouraging them to think about ORISE or other internship programs that are available at EPA or other parts of the federal government. But again, if you have questions, just send a note in. Send me a note. We'll make sure it gets to the right, person. Obviously, no guarantee. But what we do, this is one of the places that I really believe, anytime I get a question regarding someone having an interest, especially a student having an interest in working at EPA, I often make sure that it gets to the right person. At a minimum, I have an informational, I often have informational conversation with that person. That takes up a lot of my time, just talking to those students about potential opportunities here at EPA and elsewhere in the federal government.
Oh, that's great. All right, we still have a few more questions. So a lot of the IIJA funding talks about allocations over the next 5 years. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, so this is a big question. But what's going to happen when that 5 years is up, or what do you hope will happen, in terms of water sector funding after this, this 5 years?
Yeah, so even though the funding is for 5 years, many of these projects, frankly, won't be, many projects will continue beyond the 5 years. And so I see, at a minimum, we are going to be spending a lot of resources, I would say up to the next 10 years. And then who knows what happens, right?
Right.
They could have another infusion of cash. But the thing that I've been telling my team and others, let's maximize what we get over the next 5 to 10 years. Because a typical project life, if you will, a project generally lasts about, from construction start to end, somewhere around 3 to 4 years. And so I see a lot of construction starting in the next, couple of years, lasting beyond the 5 years. Hopefully, additional resources or infusion will happen. But I really want to focus on our ability now to really create, what I've been talking about in this conversation this morning, resilient and sustainable projects. I'm just excited about what I think we can do there. But I am not looking beyond the 5 to 10 years right now, because, you don't want to do that. You don't want to lose this opportunity. And I think we just got to be, so focused on what's ahead right now, get it done, and then start to think about what's next.
Absolutely. All right, we have time for just a couple more questions. What is being done to integrate the recycling of organics and the technology associated with its use?
So I readily admit that's really not my space, and so I will, if someone wants to send me the question, I'll make sure the right person get back to you. I could attempt to answer, but I know exactly where my lane is, so I'm going to stay in my lane right now. That's not my lane.
That perfectly understandable. All right. What is the EPA doing to help farmers stop the use of manure, which can lead to harmful pathogens into our water? According to the USDA, farmers are still using manure in cornfields. However, during the fertilizer shortage, a lot of farmers may have switched to manure. What sort of health risks do you see by the use of not only manure, but also synthetic fertilizers to our drinking water?
All right, so I'm going to give you the political answer to this one. So again, farmers are a key stakeholders, obviously. The agents in my shop, we have a program for CAFOs, which is confined animal feeding operations. And if a CAFO is discharging, they need an NPDES permit, and then the NPDES permit would have certain requirements. across the country, we're seeing a lot of innovation around how to address discharges into waters of the United States. There are some places where farmers are, having collaborative practices with governments, whether it's EPA and others, to figure out, okay, they're monitoring what's happening, seeing what's coming out, and then trying to figure out ways to deploy some of the best management practices to reduce, as I think that the person is asking, to reduce, discharges into water. So this is an area where there's a lot of work happening at EPA, in our CAFA program, in our solid waste program. It is a huge area of emphasis and focus for us in trying to reduce, pollution runoff into waters of the United States. But there's a recognition that this has to be a collaborative process, if you will. We need to, farmers are critical stakeholders, and so we need to continue to figure out ways to work together to reduce those runoff and pollution.
Absolutely. All right, one or two more. So this one's about lead service line replacement. So will the EPA require the replacement of lead service lines from mains all the way to individual meters?
So again, I think I know the answer to this one, but again, I'm going to lead. This one is in my good colleague's lane, Jennifer McLean. If you would like to actually get a sort of the right answer to that, please send that question to me and Frank, and I'll make sure you get the answer. But yeah, the lead effort is in our sister shop.
All right, perfect. And then that leaves our last question for the day, which is, this person said, driving near sewage treatment plants, especially during summer and windy days, some facilities give off a really strong smell. What could these townships do to reduce the smell that is sometimes nauseating? I feel that these plants are not being kept clean from slug buildup. What does or what can the EPA do to ensure that smells are kept to a minimum to ensure a clean environment for everyone?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So I think in a lot of instances where that is happening, it's important to report it. Maybe it's just a natural occurring issue. Sometimes additional work needs to happen there. Many utilities across the country are putting in place, odor control technologies. So again, this is another effort that requires collaboration, coordination, if you will. So as someone driving by and there is this perception that this is really not the ordinary, pick up, call the appropriate, whether it's the EPA or the state, to figure out if there's anything we can do. But again, I know for a fact that many utilities across the country are putting in odor control technologies, but it doesn't negate the fact that, perhaps there are a few that need some additional attention. So let us know if you're driving by something and it just seems out of the norm. Let us know, and we'll figure out if there's a response we can provide or if there's some way we could potentially address or mitigate that.
Okay, awesome. And we had one more come in, so I promise this is really the last question this time. Are you able to give a general timeline prediction for the final promulgation of PFAS compounds into appropriate categorical industrial discharge standards?
I cannot. So PFAS lead is in our Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water. I don't oversee that shop. Please send that question. I'll send it to the appropriate people, and I'll get it back to my colleagues here at AQUALIS, and then they can get it back to you. So please send a question via chat. If someone could send them to me, we'll get them to the right folks.
Absolutely. Thank you. We will get those to you. I'm afraid we've run out of time today. So Andrew, thank you so much for answering all of those questions. And of course, if anyone has any more, we have some resources and emails we can provide. And that concludes our keynote presentation. I'd like to thank Andrew for being our keynote speaker in today's event, and of course, all of you for joining. We have a full day of sessions, but our next ones are Green Infrastructure for a Resilient Future or PFAS and Stormwater Pacific Precursors. You can join either session by exiting out of this event and going back into the agenda and select the session you would like to attend by clicking on View Session. I hope to see you there, and thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay. All right.